Uh, yes, good morning, everybody.
I request Dr. Dayanand to please
Yes,
welcome the participants.
yes, sir. A very good morning and warm welcome to all of you. On behalf of Vice Chancellor and Registrar Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences, I welcome all of you for today's training or education program. Today's topic is the guidelines for management of COVID-19, a point of care approach version 4. And now I'll invite our Honorable Vice Chancellor for opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Good morning. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Audible.
Yes, sir. Very good morning to one and all. In the pursuit of disseminating authentic information, giving authentic knowledge to all the beneficiaries like doctors, specialists, healthcare workers, and all those who are involved in the management of COVID, the Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences has taken up the onus of conducting training programs in the series of training programs which are being held week after week. This is the second week and the third lecture. And today we have Dr. Shashi Bhushan, who is a member of the task force, technical advisory committee, and also the RGHS expert committee, and one of the members who has been drafting all the protocols. We know that to treat COVID-19, there are guidelines from the Government of India, from ICMR, from All India Institute of Medical Science, and each state has got its own formulation as to how to treat and manage COVID patients. The RGHS Subject Expert Committee, Clinical Expert Committee, comprising of various specialists, always keeps updating its treatment protocol, which is being now uniformly followed across the state in all the government and private hospitals. And today, very recently, we released the fourth version of the treatment protocol, and the changes that have been brought in will be highlighted by Dr. Shashi Bhushan. I hope this treatment protocol will definitely benefit a lot of patients and also help our doctors who are treating the COVID patients in all the private and government hospitals in managing the patients better. So right from home isolation to the ICU, the management is completely discussed by Dr. Shashi Bhushan. At the end of it, there will be question and answers. I hope this session would bring in clear a lot of doubts in the minds of treating doctors and also help them in managing day-to-day management of patients. Over to Dr. Dayanand for continuing the program. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for the opening remarks.
Dr. Shashi Bhushan?
Yes, yes.
Over to you to continue with the session. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, sir. I thank Honorable Vice Chancellor, Shri Dr. Satyanarayana sir, for giving this opportunity to talk on the recent guidelines, the latest guidelines on the management of COVID-19, point of care, what has to be done at each point and each level. I'll share my slide. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, right. Yeah, our aim would be basically to make this pandemic as an epidemic first and reduce it to an endemic status so that the infection is no matter of worry and can be easily dealt with. Everybody should come out with an idea of how to do this. So each have a capacity or capability to do that. Until then, we should start living with the virus rather than just evading it. This is what I'd like to stress on. We have learned in the last 1 year a lot of things. There is a lot of change from what we have done from our previous guidelines. Earlier, our guidelines were management part from, we had made it as mild, moderate, severe. Now we have categorized. This is what is called as point of care, where the patient has to be, that is the point of care of treatment. We have categorized these patients into A, B, C, D, E, F. So basically, A and B are home isolation. These are patients who are asymptomatic or patient with mild symptoms. These symptoms can be mild, like anosmia, fever, dry cough, myalgia, diarrhea, loss of taste and smell. These patients can be at home isolation. The C category, basically C categories are patients who can be placed at COVID care center or a designated COVID health center. Again, these patients basically can have mild symptoms or may be symptomatic. Especially elderly, age is one of the biggest comorbidities. Age more than 60, obesity. The second in line is obesity. What we are seeing, what we have learned last 1 year is obesity is the highest risk for mortality. So that is the reason obesity is placed second. Then other comorbidities like hypertension, diabetes, ISD, chronic lung disease, COPD, immunosuppressed states, it could be CKD or chronic liver disease. These are patients, again, depending upon the symptoms, how severe, they can be placed in CCC or DCHC. They can also be placed at home isolation. The C group, under a medical supervision, still can be placed at home. So it requires a continuous monitoring. Our aim is basically to see that as 85% of our patients are asymptomatic or mild symptomatic. So we want all of them or a maximum to be at home isolation management rather than coming, everybody need not come to the hospital. Our target is the patients who are in the DEF group, who requires hospitalization and quality care so that you can save more lives. So that's one message you need to take and understand about this point of care treatment. Okay, coming to the next, DEF. D are patients who have pneumonia on a CT scan, but without respiratory failure, and saturation is more than 94%. Again, these patients with comorbidities should be admitted in a designated COVID hospital in the wards, not in the ICU, in the wards. The next group of patients who fall into E are pneumonia with respiratory failure, whose saturation is less than 94. They are the patients who require oxygen, high flow, or oxygen bed, either in the HTU. So last group of patients are the F group, patients who are having pneumonia with respiratory failure. They can be in sepsis or a multi-organ failure. The admission should be in the ICU. Coming to home isolation, as I told, symptoms, and a patient who is opting for home isolation, what are the basic investigations you need to ask? The basic investigations like CBC, RBS, chest X-ray, CRP, and a continuous monitoring of oxygen saturation is very important, 6 hourly. And more importantly is the 6-minute walk test, especially for patients. But what we are seeing under home isolation, a few percentage, very less percentage of patients who are becoming symptomatic on day 7, 8. So they tend to, especially patients who are having fever and severe body ache, are becoming symptomatic. Symptomatic in the sense, after a 6-minute walk test, the saturation is falling. So you need to monitor them very carefully. Home monitoring is very important. And all patients who opt for home monitoring should have a pulse oximeter or a thermometer at home. And these patients, we have a complete home isolation unit in from the government of Karnataka, which is manned by the medical student. Again, under the guidance of Honorable Vice Chancellor Rajiv Gandhi University, all the students have been trained. Almost more than 1,000 students have been trained to manage the patients at home isolation. We have been training them, and we are suggesting what has to be done from their side. The main thing what anybody under home isolation you need to see is, once the patient becomes symptomatic, say at the end of 12 to 24 hours, you need to ask for the symptoms, and immediately these patients will be shifted to CCC or DCHC, depending upon his situation. Again, a word on 6-minute walk test. This is very important. Everybody needs to know what it is, how it is to be done. This basically helps in knowing the cardiopulmonary exercise tolerance test. So usually you are advising the patients to wear a pulse oximeter before he walks for a 6-minute walk. He should rest for 5 minutes. So wear a pulse oximeter and walk for 6 minutes at his home. And if there is a drop in saturation of more than 4%, or he feels unwell, a lightheaded or a short of breath, and performing these tests, immediately these patients should be shifted to DCHC or DCH. This 6-minute walk test for patients who are aged more than 60 years can be reduced to 3 minutes. So that also is equivalent. 3-minute walk test is sufficient for patients who are 60 and above. Once a COVID patient is there, then who are the patients who are eligible for a home isolation? The person should be clinically assigned as asymptomatic or mild symptomatic through a telephonic trial by the healthcare worker. So he will suggest what has to be done, whether the patient, healthcare worker calls once he is turned positive, and depending upon his condition, he is placed at home isolation. There are certain guidelines are undertaken from the patient side also. He needs to take an undertaking for self-isolation, and the undertaking also states that he should keep informing about his health status on a regular basis. The home isolation shall not be applicable for pregnant women 2 weeks before expected date of delivery. So under home isolation, what are the treatment you want to suggest? So this is from again Government of India and our state guidelines. What is being told is ivermectin 12 milligram OD for 3 days or favipiravir. So favipiravir is one thing they've added only in patients who complains of fever and myalgia. The role of favipiravir, that you need to start it early. So early again is the antiviral. So the dose of favipiravir is 1800 milligram BD on day 1. What is available now is 400 milligram. Earlier we had 200 milligram. So 400 milligram means you are giving 4.5 tablet in the morning and 4.5 milligram tablet on day 1, followed by two tablets of 400 milligram in the morning and night for next 6 days. So that's one thing you need to know about. The latest, what is new is, which has been added yesterday only, it was included in our guidelines, is the usage of budesonide, DPI or MDI, 800 milligram BD for 5 days. So when do you want to start this budesonide? In case the patient complains of fever and cough, which does not subside at the end of 5 days. So this is the indication for use of budesonide has been suggested. Again, from Government of India, this has been suggested. We have incorporated this guidelines in our state yesterday only. Along with this, vitamin C and zinc has been suggested. At home, once a patient on home isolation, what are the things you need to monitor? So you need to tell the patient to monitor his symptoms and body temperature. He should have adequate hydration, saturation and pulse oximeter to be monitored, and measure. If he is hypertensive, ask him to check his blood pressure. So he would be having an automated apparatus. So he needs to check for his blood pressure. And you have to see that he has a separate well-ventilated room with a separate toilet and for the person who is in home isolation. He shall stay in a separate identified room away from the persons in the home. In case the patient develops breathlessness or a resting rate of more than 100, heart rate of more than 100, saturation falling less than 94, the 6-minute walk test desaturation of more than 4%, neutrophil lymphocyte ratio of more than 3.5, and worsening of symptoms, he needs to be shifted to a designated COVID hospital or a DCH. So the next is we have finished A, B, then we're talking about C and D. Sometimes what happens, the patient cannot, if he's not having any facility, the proper facilities for home isolation, but he's asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic. These are the patients whom we can place them in the COVID care centers. So group A, B with no adequate facilities for proper home isolation will be shifted to a CCC. Again, at the CCC is the same thing. Any desaturation, you are going to shift into a DCH or a DCHC. Again, basically it is a monitoring facility. What we have suggested is at all CCC, a 50% bed should have oxygen facility. Government has said around 10 to 15% oxygen facility will be available. Again, the treatment is same for COVID care center patients. It's the same as that of home isolation. So again, monitoring of the same thing. Again, your saturation, 6-minute walk, heart rate, in case he worsens with all these things, shifted to a DCHC or a DCH. So once the patient is in home isolation, when do you want to discharge or release him from either home isolation or a COVID care center? Again, our Government of India guidelines, which has been released yesterday, says now it is only 10 days of symptom free. So you should not have fever for 3 consecutive days, maintain an oxygen saturation of about 94%. So he is eligible to get released from home isolation, and there is no need for any COVID repeat test, COVID RT-PCR test, or any test for that matter, either in CCC or a home isolation. So coming to, we finish A, B, C, D. We are talking about D and E. C. Here, it is the designated COVID healthcare center. Here, the patients who are eligible again are symptomatic patients with comorbidities, age, as I told you, and what test you require for these patients. Basically, with comorbidities who are symptomatic will be at DCHC. The investigation suggested are a complete blood count, LFT, RFT, RBS, ECG, chest X-ray, SpO2, HRCT. Now HRCT is being done for all patients. All patients are getting an HRCT done on their own once they've been diagnosed as COVID positive. So everybody is worried about the involvement. So that's one thing what we are seeing of late. Even in a mild, there are some changes, but not to worry. Unless the patient is symptomatic, the HRCT correlation not to be done. So the most important thing is the CRP and D-dimer levels. So in a patient who are admitted in DCHC, the blood test usually, in case the baseline values are abnormal only, the blood test needs to be repeated after 72 hours. If it is normal, then there is no requirement of a repeat blood test. Again, at the DCHC, the treatment remains same. In case the addition here would be a low molecular weight heparin, in case the D-dimer values are more than 1000 nanogram per ml. So enoxaparin or a low molecular weight heparin to be given for 7 days here. Again, there is one more important thing. Patients who are symptomatic at the DCHC, sometimes what happens on the 7th, 8th day in the hospital, they tend to desaturate. So in that situation, you need to start oxygen immediately. A patient whom you monitor, these patients, when you get a CT scan, if there is an evidence of pneumonia on the CT scan and there is a desaturation, a saturation falling down less than 94, then the role of usage of a steroid and especially dexamethasone 6 milligram OD for 5 to 10 days, and remdesivir, again the usage. If you want to start remdesivir, it is within 8 days. The startage of remdesivir should be within 8 days. It can be at the DCHC or DCH in the ward. So I'm trying to tell you, not before that. It can be at the DCHC when the saturation is falling, if there is an evidence of pneumonia on the CT, so there is a little overlap at DCHC and DCH, what you need to know regarding the startage of remdesivir. So along with these medication, you need to monitor for oxygen saturation and antibiotic depending upon the clinical situation, or if you want to send a culture, you can start a empirical antibiotic and manage the comorbidities. Again, coming to designated, now we are talking about DEF. So D and E is very important. Designated COVID hospital, that is in the wards, not in the ICU. Here we are admitting patients at the ward, patients who are having pneumonia without respiratory failure. Again, this is again very important. So when there are possibilities that patient is all right, but his say CORAD scoring or a CT severity score is in the moderate range, not in the mild, moderate range, where SpO2 is more than 94. So these are again the patients where you need to monitor. So the investigation what you are asking is here at the wards are a complete COVID panel. So you're asking like what I told you in the previous at the sea level. So procalcitonin is one other important thing to rule out any cardiac, secondary bacterial infection. Troponin I to rule out cardiac. IL-6 if it is available. So if the baseline blood tests are abnormal, you repeat the blood test at every 48 hours here. Basically, the most important decision to be taken is on the clinical signs and symptoms rather than the blood and radiological parameters at this level, at the DCHC, at the ward. The patient is on oxygen, say high flow oxygen, then you use something called a ROX index. ROX index is nothing but a measurement of SpO2 by FiO2 by respiratory rate. Basically, when the patient is on high flow of oxygen, here you can assess whether he will require the risk of intubation. So it's a very simple mathematical calculation you need to do. If it is more than 4.88, there is very less risk of intubation. If it is less than 4.8, then the need for shifting him to the ICU or monitoring is so that you can say that this patient may require intubation. At the ward, you can make an assessment on this. Again, the auxiliary delivery system, how it is mentioned here. At the nasal cannula, up to 6 liters. Up to 8 to 12 liters. How much FiO2 can be given? With a Venturi mask, maximum of 15 liters, and what is the FiO2? With a mask with a reservoir, up to 12 liters, where FiO2 can be reached up to 99%. With a non-breathing, maximum up to 15 liters, you can still achieve FiO2 of 60 to 100%. Again, at the wards, what is the treatment of choice? The first treatment, again, depending upon the blood values, you need to see for the D-dimer, if it is more than 500, low molecular weight heparin is considered. Again, if the CRP is elevated, here you can plan to start steroids. The methylprednisolone for 40 milligram for 5 to 10 dexamethasone. Again, I told you at D level designated at the wards, still you can use remdesivir. So it falls into moderate. So our indication for remdesivir is at the moderate level only, not at mild, not at severe. So once a patient is in the ward, you start him on oxygen, monitor oxygenation, saturation. And most important thing which everybody do not do is pulmonary rehabilitation exercises. If you start training the patient or teaching them regarding the pulmonary breathing exercise, certain exercise we have it in our guidelines actually. So that has to be told to these patients. How exercise program like a diaphragmatic breathing exercise, incentive spirometry, sit and stand, standing marching exercise. There are certain exercises which is there in our guidelines regarding pulmonary rehabilitation. This will basically help for an early improvement, which is not being done. Because we are seeing in last 1 year, there is no proper medication or a medical management. It is only certain maneuvers like pulmonary rehabilitation, supportive counseling to the patient. These are very important things which needs to be specified, and management of comorbidities. If you can do these three things, the patient will recover fast and come out of the hospital at the earliest. So this one thing very important. And here danger signs, what you need to know is SpO2 falls less than 90 on any occasion, and a neutrophil lymphocyte ratio of more than 17. Again, that's another important thing where is a sign to shift him to the STU or ICU. Here again in the wards, patient who is having pneumonia with a respiratory failure, whose saturation is less than 94. It is the same D and E. D is without respiratory failure, E is with respiratory failure. Where saturation is more than 94, here it is less than 94. The tests are same. Again, all those things you need to monitor. The blood test. Look for the treatment protocol and manage appropriately. Again, at the wards, what you have to do, as I told you, oxygen therapy as appropriate should be managed. And what is most important is the COVID-19 awake repositioning proning protocol. This, again, I'm stressing on this certain exercise. I'll be telling you in the coming slides how these tests are done, how these exercises are done, or how positioning is done for the improvement of oxygen saturation. This is very important. So I would stress everybody, rather than medication, we need to work on these at this level for the improvement of oxygen saturation. The other drugs are methylprednisolone or dexamethasone, a low molecular weight heparin, remdesivir again. Then here at the wards, the patient is in the moderate. In case even after giving all these medication, his saturation does not improve, then there is a possibility of usage of convalescent plasma. So this is the only place where we can use convalescent plasma. That is, if you are starting, it should be early, within 7 to 8 days of the symptoms or a COVID report. Once the patients have a COVID report, so within 7 to 8, the response we have seen is wonderful. When you use the timing of the convalescent plasma is very important, and it has saved life in certain situations. We have seen ourselves in some of the patients. Another is symptomatic. So adequate, again, management of comorbidities. Again, I'm stressing on pulmonary rehabilitation. And what are the danger signs? Again, SpO2 less than 90% and neutrophil lymphocyte ratio of more than 17% is the time when we need to shift this patient to the ICU. Here, the DCHC, the F, ICU is F. Here, the patients are in multi-organ failure. They may be in sepsis, SpO2 of less than 90, respiratory rate of more than 30. They may be in altered mental stage, and they may also have end organ failure, also signs of end organ failure. All the blood tests are same. Here we are asking for a blood culture. The next thing is to check for is there any infection in the blood culture. So in sepsis we are talking about. So again, all decisions to be taken based on the clinical signs and symptoms. Here the main management is oxygen therapy and COVID awake repositioning protocol. I will tell you on that in details. And initiate antibiotic as per institution protocol, ideally within 1 hour of admission. The other treatment is same. We have been using low molecular weight heparin, methylprednisolone, dexamethasone, hydrocortisone, or a tablet prednisolone in case whether it is not available for 5 to 10 days, depending upon what is available. Here, the role of consider the use of tocilizumab. That's one thing what is being suggested is tocilizumab, 8 milligram per kg. When do you want to use tocilizumab, especially in the patients in ICU. It is more like a double-edged sword. When you are suggesting tocilizumab, it can worsen the condition of the patient or improve. Basically, it's an anti-IL-6 tocilizumab to be started again in 100 ml normal saline or 1 hour. So the choice of tocilizumab and one more thing is itolizumab. Itolizumab is an anti-CD6 monoclonal antibody. Basically, itolizumab acts on the interferon, IL-6 and tumor necrosis factor. So that's an advantage of using a itolizumab. So when there is a release of all these things, so itolizumab is a better one compared to tocilizumab. But studies have mentioned that the role of usage of tocilizumab. So we don't have much study on itolizumab. So again, as a emergency approval in the clinical trial, it is being used, especially in patient who continues to be hypoxic in spite of high respiratory support. The others are symptomatic, so you need to continually monitor. Again, a patient on ventilator, what pulmonary rehab you want to do? Basically, you need to wait for him to come off the ventilator, then plan for some rehabilitation exercises. A lot of patients are dying because of myocarditis. So that is the reason you need to monitor cardiac monitoring and MR scanning for myocarditis. MRI of the heart is suggested only in a tertiary care center. This happens. So it has been suggested to find out whether the patient is in myocarditis. Again, when to want to repeat the investigation? Investigation to repeat it as and when appropriate. It is based on the individual patients. Certain points I would like to stress on in relation with ventilation in patients with ARDS with low lung volume. What you need to know is actually this itself is a big lecture on management of patient on ventilator. There's something called a L phenotype and a H phenotype, which we need to know. I'll just, in short, I will tell you about what is L and H phenotype. L phenotype, typically they present early of the viral pneumonitis. They basically are hypoxemic. These patients are hypoxemic, more of a type 1 respiratory failure. They have a high compliance and low recoverability. That is, their response poor to PEEP and prone position on the ventilation. And these are the patients who do not do well on a mechanical ventilation, and to avoid them putting on a ventilator. If you know these things, our ventilator management becomes easy. The H phenotype are, they come late. They have a typical later illness like classical ARDS, especially patient who's already on a non-invasive ventilation. Here they can have both type 1 and type 2. There could be carbon dioxide retention also. And these patients basically are respond to a PEEP and prone ventilation. And they may benefit from on a mechanical ventilation, like what we do it on a ARDS protocol. So these are something regarding ARDS with low lung compliance and a normal lung compliance. So this is what I would like to say on the ventilator part. Regarding, it's just some settings what we are told. So I made it in simple when it comes to L and H phenotype. So regarding the tidal volume, low tidal volume is what is being suggested. This slide, basically this slide, if you can have it in your ward or ICU. So how frequently you need to do at A, B, C, D, E, F levels. What has to be done? How frequently you need to repeat these tests? That's one thing mentioned in this slide. Coming to CARP protocol, what is this? So this is basically, you need to change position between the following every 2 hours. That is, you ask the patient to be on left lateral recumbent, right lateral recumbent, sitting upright for 60 to 90 degrees, lying prone in bed. And Trendelenburg, that is supine in the bed for 30 degrees head up, only if the 4 position don't show improvement. So you start, I'll show you some figures of these things and check saturation of 10 minutes of position. If there is no improvement, then change to a different position. This is a position. So 30 minutes to 2 hours, you ask the patient to lay on the belly. So if you can see some difference. Then if there is no difference, keep changing the position. Putting on a right side, left side, again sitting up, then again coming back to the original, lying on a belly. So these are something called a CAR protocol, which basically this can be started off at the ward level. So if this is being done, automatically there are possibilities of a early improvement of a patients. Our target saturation, oxygen saturation, what we need to know is with the lowest FiO2 available. All COVID patients, the target saturation is about 94 to 96%. Patient in a COPD or a pre-existing lung disease, target saturation is 88 to 92%. On mechanical ventilation, it is 90 to 92%. This is again on the right side. It is how to wean a patient at the ward or at the HDU. Once a patient is on oxygen, you need to allow 5 minutes of each dose after adjusting whether upward or downward. So when you have put a patient on a nasal cannula, in case he is not responding with 6 liters, you put him on a face mask, which can give up to 12 liters, then non-rebreathing mask up to 15 liters, high flow cannula, then non-invasive ventilator, alright? Then if he is not responding, put him on invasive ventilation. Coming to the most important things which we have dealt in the present guidelines is regarding because our mortality in COVID patient, what we have seen is more among the hypertensive patients and the diabetes. That is the reason we have come out with a separate guidelines. Guidelines are how to manage hypertension and diabetes. So I'm going to talk about hypertension. Because hypertension can cause a twofold mortality when compared to a non-hypertensive. So this can lead to severe form of COVID-19. So early intervention in the management of hypertension is very much important. It can reduce the mortality. So all hypertension should be asked to get a ECG, 2-day echo if possible, a BNP, troponin I, CPKMB, RFT or a urine routine, serum electrolytes, cardiac monitoring for arrhythmias, MR scanning for myocarditis, USG abdomen or chest. So all COVID-19 patients present with hypertension of, say, BP of more than 140 to 90 and systolic blood pressure of more than 160 millimeter. So you should find out what medications they are. The history of hypertensive drugs, you need to, if it is controlled, so they need to control depending upon what medication. If they are diabetic, on a ACE inhibitor or ARB, so you need to ask them to continue this medication. And a CKD or end stage renal disease on hemodialysis to continue the same antihypertensive and monitoring RFT. If you are suspecting acute kidney injury, these are certain tests you need to ask for. Avoid ACE inhibitors or ARB. Use renin-angiotensin aldosterone system antihypertensives. And daily monitoring of serum creatinine and electrolytes. Avoid nephrotoxic drugs. If associated with diabetes present or a steroid use, the monitoring of blood sugars is very important, and check for procalcitonin if there is any secondary bacterial infection. The next most important thing is the management of diabetes, hyperglycemia and diabetes in COVID. What we are supposed to know, which has not been dealt anywhere, we are trying to highlight certain very important things. In the early admission, so people with COVID-19 infection appear to have a greater risk of hyperglycemia. What we have seen is COVID itself can cause hyperglycemia. So that's one thing what we have seen. And especially along with diabetes, they have a higher risk. And their presentation also sometimes may be atypical. They may present with diabetic ketoacidosis. Our suggested action, what we are supposed to do with this patient is check blood glucose in everybody on admission, check for ketones, stop for SGLT inhibitors, consider using 10 to 20% of glucose where ketosis persists in early admission. In severe illness on admission, fluid requirement may differ in those DKR and possibility of a lung leak or a myocarditis. So our again suggested action for these patients is restoring the circulating volume back to normal and contact the diabetic specialist if available. In all in patients whose blood sugars are very high, say 400, 500, infusion pumps may not be available for a use of intravenous as these are required elsewhere. But all ICU patients will have infusion pump. You can start them on these infusion pump, IV insulin. So our again suggested action is management of to put them on a subcutaneous regimen of hyperglycemia management and mild DKA. So in the ICU again, if there is a significant insulin resistance seen in patients with type 2 diabetes, these patients again should be started on an IV insulin protocol, depending upon the say 20 units per hour you can start and slowly monitor for the blood sugar levels. Now, people with if the COVID patient who comes to you with no past history of diabetes, but no stress hyperglycemia. So how frequently you want to get a blood glucose monitoring? The frequency is 2 tests per day at least possible. One before fasting before and 2 hours after the meal. The target blood sugar is pre-meal 80 to 120 and post-meal of 140 to 180. A special note is if the initial blood glucose levels are normal, repeat frequently daily, and daily monitoring should be done if the patient is on steroid, because most of our patients will be on steroid. So you need to monitor blood sugar on a regular basis. People with no past history of hyperglycemia, so how do you monitor them? The frequency of blood sugar is, you need to ask for at least 4 to 6 tests per day, again fasting and postprandial. Target blood sugar is 80 to 120. For all, what we have, this guideline says is the target is pre-meal is 180 to 120, post-meal is 140 to 80. The patient is already on the oral medication. So always it is better to include a gliptin in the treatment regimen, especially if he's on metformin, you can continue using metformin along with vildagliptin. And if you want to start him on a insulin, regular insulin, it still is not controlled with the oral medication, you need to start him on insulin. So regular insulin schedule is very important. So how it is calculated? Depending upon the total daily dose given on the previous day. So how much insulin is received on the previous day, it is been scaled as low, mid and high. If he is received less than 40 units, then the dosage target is 2 insulin. Just you're adding 2 insulin as per the guidelines between 150 to 200 and 4 units at 200 to 250, 6 at 250. This is a slow phase. They have seen that it is, I mean, the units of insulin is very low in a phase manner because we are repeating 4 to 6 tests here, and on that basis monitored. If it is 41 to 80, again it is 3, 6, 9, 12 on the blood sugar level. If it requires more than 80, that is a high scale. Again, it is 4 units, 8, 12 and 16 units. People with history of diabetes or on oral diabetes, whether he is plus or minus insulin. Here, the blood glucose monitoring here is, the frequency is again 4 to 6 tests per day. It is all same. What you are seeing is all the same. You need to continue the usage of oral vildagliptin along with the the regular insulin. The one more important schedule what you are seeing is the usage of what we call as Besselar, that is Glargine. So here only at bedtime, 4 units of along with the regular insulin with oral hypoglycemic. The usage of this is used here. In patients who are in the ICU, it's all again the same thing. Everything is same except for the usage of the frequency of tests here. The frequency of test is 7 tests per day. 7 tests per day. The rest of the things is same. The use of bolus Basilog can be based on the on a 2:2:1 basis. Again, 4 units at bedtime is what has been suggested. You just have to sit on this and work. It's very simple. How to increase the insulin, where to add a regular dosage, how to increase the dose of regular insulin, and how to use the Basilog, what we are using at the ICU level. So in case of you want to use an intravenous insulin use. The indication for intravenous insulin is patients who are nil by mouth or having erratic diet pattern and is suspected to have a diabetic ketoacidosis and uncontrolled hyperglycemia despite usage of basal bolus regimen. Or say more than 300, we have seen about more than around 500, 450 in our ICU. So we have used IV infusion, insulin infusion. To start with, insulin can be initiated at a dose of 1 glucose every say 1 to 22 hourly, can be extended to 4 hourly wherever required. Again, our glycemic target here is 110 to 180. We usually see that they don't go into hypoglycemia, and up to 220 you can relax, monitor and relax. Especially all our COVID patients are on steroids. So most of them are diabetic. So definitely steroid will increase the blood sugar. So in that situation, what you need to do is split total dose of IV or oral steroid into 2 doses. That is, first before breakfast, second before dinner. That is, you need to break up before breakfast and before dinner. So if you can do that, even the blood sugar levels are controlled. So once all these treatment protocol is known, then the patient, when you want to discharge this patient, for asymptomatic, it is 10 days, as I've told you, or a patient at home, and no need of repeat RT-PCR. For mild to moderate patient shall be again discharged after 10 days. That is, whether it is onset of symptom or that is more important rather than RT-PCR. There is no need for a repeat RT-PCR. You should maintain a saturation of more than 95% for the last 3 or 4 days. So in a severe patient, we are seeing now a lot of patients are at the hospital only, severe chronic. Some patients we have seen are oxygen dependent. They don't want to go. So these are the patients whom you need to shift them to a step down COVID care center. That's what something coming up now, step down COVID care center. From the ICU, the patient is not having any clinical signs and symptoms. Only saturation is not maintained. Saturation, once you is off oxygen, the saturation may drop. So these are the patients who requires oxygen. You need to get an RT-PCR for these patients, especially in the patients in the ICU or a ventilator, off ventilator. These are the patients you need to shift them to a step-down COVID care center. So that's one important thing you need to know, because we cannot keep all these patients. They may here for months together. So to avoid these things and give a quality care for the critical patient, we need to shift them to a step-down center. Then coming to something about definition of death due to COVID. A lot of deaths you are seeing. Again, this is basically it is defined for surveillance purpose as death resulting from clinically compatible illness in a probable or confirmed COVID-19 cases unless there is a clear alternative cause of death that can be related to COVID disease. Example, there are a lot of patients coming with trauma, malignancy. So you need to attribute under which condition these patients are having underlying condition. So death due to COVID are the ones that count as counted in the cause of death collection. That is for death reporting, not related to the other condition. Again, by WHO, it has mentioned same thing, a probable or a confirmed COVID-19 case. Is there an alternative cause of death that can be related to same thing? Whatever I told you, it is the same thing. And regarding the disposal of dead body in a dignified manner with similar protocol as for COVID-19 positive cases, we have the latest Government of Karnataka guidelines. You can refer that. I think it is released very shortly, 2 days back, if I'm right. So you can refer regarding disposable of these patients. Thank you. Any questions? I will take.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. So now I invite Dr. Rupashri for question and answer session. Over to Rupashri.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Rupashri, I have a question to ask Shashi Bhushan. Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Please, sir. Please ask.
Dr. Shashi Bhushan, what is the status of patients who are RT-PCR negative and CXR positive, shows some ground glass appearance, HRCT? Are they admissions denied, or what is the present status?
No, sir. That also we have, the Government of Karnataka has taken care of. There is a new circular which says that all RT-PCR negative to be treated as COVID patients only as per the syndromic approach. So when the RT-PCR, because RT-PCR yield is only 50%, the remaining could be false negative. So you have to get a CT scan depending upon HRCT scoring, CT Corat scoring or a severity scoring, and the symptoms and blood investigation. They all fit into COVID-like picture. So to be considered and treated as COVID only. The new guidelines is already there, and the treatment protocol also remains same as that of our point of care, sir.
Exactly. The RGHS Clinical Expert Committee has already framed guidelines, and to see that such patients are not denied for admission or treatment. They are called as COVID syndrome patients, and then they have to be treated like COVID patients only, right?
Yes,
thank
sir.
you.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you, Shashi. Dr. Rupashri can go on.
Thank you so much, sir. First question is there any alternative for oximeter?
No.
No. What is the criteria to initiate HFNC?
Again, if you had listened to the previous lecture on oxygen therapy, there is a phased manner, like how to go about on the oxygen. The guideline clearly mentioned that when the patient is not doing even maintaining saturation on a rebreathing mask, say about 15 liters. So that is where the role of HFNC or NIV comes into play.
25 scoring, your comments?
Sorry?
25 scoring.
Yeah, it is a radiological based on the lobes. The HRCT scoring based on each lobe has been given certain scoring. The maximum is 25. So it is from 1 to 8 is mild, 8 to 15 is moderate, anything above 15 is severe.
Protocol for weaning.
Yeah, we have told again protocol for weaning. Again, I told you in one of the slides how to approach. It's the same way. So once a patient is on a HFNC or a NIV, so alternatively to start with, you have an alternative process. Then put him back on a intermittent. You need to put HFNC intermittently, then NRBM, HFNC, a face mask, NRBM, or a nasal prong. That's how the weaning process is done.
Is convalescent plasma should be of the same group, or can we give different blood group also?
Again, it is like a similar of a ABO blood group. So you need to check certain things. But availability, again, we need to promote all COVID patients to donate plasma, convalescent plasma. So that's one thing, that message. Again, we were in the last year, a lot of patients donated and a lot of patients received convalescent plasma. But this year, getting a convalescent plasma is very difficult because nobody is coming forward to donate. So request everybody who are there to see that people come forward to donate.
A question from Tanya Taranum. Should we consider 95 saturation to be in a patient with scoliosis and COPD patient also, because they don't maintain 95 saturation normally?
I told you, as I told you, any chronic lung disease, 88 to 92 is ideal.
And question is side effects of italizumab during drug administration.
It can cause, because it's a trial drug. So we really do not know, because usage also is not known, only in a few conditions. It's an emergency drug. Side effect is also not really known as what has to be done like.
Okay. So how oftenly we need to do ABG to diagnose respiratory acidosis to the patient who are on ventilator?
I told you, it is the clinical discretion. Every too early, how the response to on the ventilator. My slide also clearly mentions that at what time you need to do the blood test also. It's all at the clinical discretion when you want to do, when the patient is in the ICU, especially ventilated patient.
Okay. And they want to know some information about spirometry, whom to start, when to start, and how long one can continue post-discharge.
Post-discharge, again, we have a pulmonary rehabilitation program where the spirometry can be started at the ward level. I told you, incentive spirometry. We have a scheduled exercise program in our state guidelines only. Okay. So our first thing at the ward level, if you can initiate incentive spirometry at the ward level for 5 minutes, it's a exercise program where about totally we have about 8 exercise program where they need to doing on a regular basis, say 1 minute, 5 minutes, 30 seconds. I can share that pulmonary rehabilitation to the group. So
sure,
this is very important, very important. I would request everybody to start asking their patient to do pulmonary rehabilitation at the ward level so that they don't get into the ICU.
ICU. Okay, sir. So are there any predictors for myocarditis?
MRI is one, and troponin specific. These are two things what you need to monitor. Okay. Especially MRI helps in myocarditis, knowing whether the patient is in myocarditis.
Okay. Regarding blood glucose monitoring, is GRBS is okay or RBS?
Depends, like GRBS or RBS, anything is fine. We want a blood sugar value.
Okay. So what are the nutritional requirements for patients on ventilator?
That itself is a very big ventilator management part. Actually, it's a completely totally, you can say 1 hour lecture we can plan for. Nutrition, again, the patient is already at the ICU level. A lot of nutrition is done. At the ICU patients at different hospitals have a different mode of management of nutrition. So that's one thing. There's a different way of each tertiary care level. Okay.
So question from Lata. Patients who are ill for more than 12 days on BiPAP dependent and unable to wean them off from the support, even after 15th or 16th day of illness, how to go about them and how to go about the prevention of fibrosis?
No, there is no way you can prevent a fibrosis. But reassess, you need to reassess these patients on NIV, reassess what is the problem. Baseline HRCT would help us in reassessing. If you can repeat the other test, X-ray, blood reports, all correlation can be help us in guiding. Fibrosis, it's a natural process, cannot be prevented. Who is going to get fibrosis, who is not going to get fibrosis, we don't know.
Okay. So, is favipiravir is compulsory? We are not using it in our institution protocol, Dr. Manju.
Yes, it is now being included in the state protocol. I told you the indication of favipiravir is patients who are having fever with body ache. We have seen a very good response at home isolation. So we have managed patients on home isolation with favipiravir.
And when to start rivaroxaban or anticoagulants?
At the time of discharge, the D-dimer continues to be on the higher side. So as long as the patient in the hospital, you can still continue use of low molecular weight heparin. Further, in case at the time of discharge, the patient is stable, but his D-dimer values are little high, then we can give it for say about another 15 days to 1 month with a follow-up D-dimer values.
Okay. Anusha S wants to ask the role of remdesivir.
Yeah, I told you, remdesivir is basically used in moderate COVID. I specifically mentioned and stressed where it has to be used.
Yes. Is it danger when a person diagnosed with the 3 times RT-PCR positive in 3 consecutive months, but asymptomatic?
But why it has been done? Why 3 times in 3 months when he's asymptomatic? We don't do that.
Yeah, maybe. So, Sunayana, she wants to know plasma donation by a pregnant recovered patient.
We really do not know about these things. There are a lot of new things, whether who can donate, who does not donate. Can, as per my knowledge, can donate. There is no harm in donation.
Provided all other...
Yeah, they can donate, no issues. I don't think so. There is any issues related to that.
Okay. So what is the duration that a COVID-treated patient can donate plasma?
Minimum of 8 weeks is what is being told. But what we are seeing is even sometimes there are no antibodies. The antibodies level are raised in the COVID patients. We have seen the specific duration of how long the antibodies persist. None of the studies can tell us. So that's still a question mark. Like ideally, what is being told is 8 weeks.
Gautam, are there any questions or hand raise options so that we can ask them to ask questions?
Yes, madam. There is no hand raise.
No hand raise. Okay,
no
I'll continue to read the chat box.
Yes, madam.
Shraddha Desai, what is the duration that a COVID treated? Yeah, I asked it. Role of Foracart in COVID and when to start?
I told you, no? Budesonide, the new guidelines, new states that it is being suggested in patients with mild symptoms whose cough and fever starts at the 5th day and persists. So it's only budesonide. Foracort contains your budesonide and formoterol. What is being suggested is only budesonide.
How we decide whether to start Dexona or methyl prednisone in COVID patients?
It depends. The individual physician will decide on his own. But studies what they have done in the recovery trial shows about dexamethasone. Mm-hmm. So we have been using both dexamethasone and methylprednisolone.
So what are the chances of recovery in severe COVID pneumonia?
That we cannot say. When the patient on ventilator, prognosis is very bad.
Very bad, yeah. In mild cases, after 10 days, we are seeing patient clinically stable and oxygen saturation is more than 95, but CT severity is more than 10. Does the patient require hospitalization?
No, not required.
Not required.
Go, but that's what I told you. Again, in all the slides, the decision should be made on the clinical signs and symptoms rather than the radiological or blood.
Correct. what to do if high grade fever continuing after 10 days of infection, but CT score is moderate and patient is already on steroids, BD?
No, moderate means he should be admitted. Even after 10 days of fever, moderate pneumonia, he requires admission.
So another question is when to stop an anticoagulant after discharge? Maybe they have to check.
I told you.
So if the D-dimer is within normal limits, whether rivaroxaban is required to be prescribed on discharge? No. Then how PCOD patient can maintain themselves in COVID situation?
I don't know why they are asking PCOD specifically.
So can we use antifibrotic
Nintedanib?
Yeah, for pulmonary fibrosis, and when to start?
For that to start, as per the guideline, even Government of India or AIMS does not suggest antifibrotic like Pirfenidone or Nintedanib. Minimum duration to start an antifibrotic, there are different schools of thought to initiate a early antifibrotic or a late antifibrotic. So what the AIMS or government AIMS protocol says is you need to wait at least for 3 months before you start them on. You have to, because there is a possibility of resolution on its own, the fibrosis getting resolved on its own. So, but what we have seen in the practice, especially in the private sector, these two drugs, Nintedanib and Pirfenidone, has been started for patients who are COVID, moderate to severe COVID.
Is there anybody who wants to ask a question directly to the speaker? Please, you can proceed. Gautam, do we have any?
Please raise hand options, madam. Please raise hand. You have in the participant menu, you have the raise hand options. Please use that.
We have another question. What is the approach towards oxygen dependency in COVID patient? What is the discharge criteria in them?
I told, madam. I already told. I don't know. They have not listened to it.
Maybe they would have joined.
Dr. Shashi Bhushan, some people would have joined late.
No, that was the last side. That was the last part. So it is the last
I understand.
Part. I will repeat.
But I think if a question comes in the chat box, it is better that we answer.
Yeah. The discharge criteria, especially it's an oxygen dependent, is again the patient who's on a ventilator or in the ICU. The criteria for him to discharge is he should be symptom free. But I told you there's something called a step down approach. Step down COVID care. What we are seeing of late is a lot of patients, saturation may not come back to normal, but all symptoms will improve. So these are the patients who can be shifted to a step down COVID care center, where only oxygen, a long-standing oxygen patient, can be maintained here. And here, a repeat RT-PCR has been done here.
We have a question, I think, from Tanya. Please ask.
Hello, sir. Good morning. Good afternoon. So, as you said that the COPD patient, we have to see the saturation level between 88 to 95 they'll maintain. What about the scoliosis? Because they are not like, they have vertebral column and all deformity. So should we consider the same thing, that 88 to 95 in the scoliosis patient also?
Basically, scoliosis patient, they have more of a pulmonary hypertension possibilities. So the saturation will not be down. So you need to monitor them. You need to monitor them only in a chronic lung disease, unless there is an effect on the lung. Because of pulmonary hypertension, the saturation is low. It's just a monitoring of scoliosis patient. COPD is a disease patient. Okay.
Okay. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Another question. How effective is vaccination if you get infected later? I didn't understand this question.
Yeah, vaccination will not prevent you from getting infected. See, because the purpose of getting vaccination is it reduces the disease severity and reduces the mortality. So you are seeing a lot of people after vaccination becoming infective. it never prevents an infection. So that is one thing. That is the reason even after vaccination, you should continue using your mask, distancing and sanitization. So that is a very clear-cut message.
Aparna Girish, are you online? You can ask your question directly. Okay. How about the effectiveness of use of antimucolytics in patients with pneumonia?
Again, basically because a lot of secretions are there in patients with moderate to severe pneumonia. So as a prevent the lysis, so you are using the antimucotics like N-acetylcysteine or aciflofelin, something like that.
Okay. Is there any other questions from the participants? Okay. How many days after receiving the first dose of Covishield vaccine, one can go for RT-PCR?
Not required. RT-PCR is not at all required.
Yeah. Is tracheostomy performed in COVID patients?
Yes, yes.
Can be. Gautam, do we have any other hand raise options?
No, madam.
No.
You can continue in the chat box only.
Dr. Rupasri, before you conclude, I would like you to highlight what is the next program that is on Tuesday. If you have the details, can you just announce, please?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Question is role of steam inhalation.
No role. I don't know, but I don't know anything of that. There is no role.
Okay. If CRP aid is raised, can we advise vaccination?
CRP has nothing to do with vaccination.
Nothing.
CRP is an acute phase reactant. It will tell you only when you want to advise vaccination. I will want to bring it to the notice. If you want to advise vaccination, the person should not have any acute infections like cough, fever, cold. So CRP has nothing to do with advising vaccination.
Dr. Shashi, nothing to do with this talk, but I would like you to highlight the role of lemon drops into the nose, which is catching everybody's this thing. Just for the information.
No role, sir. No role of those.
No role. Yeah, that's what we should be very clear about that. And I know it's not.
One submission, Dr. Shashi.
Yeah.
The role of lime drops is more dangerous rather
and
than
death record. And
that message, please give across very seriously that any misadventures by this WhatsApp and Google University claims must be discouraged.
Yes, yes. There's no role of steam. So we are talking of more of evidence-based medicine here.
Okay. So one question here, can azithromycin be given in place of doxy?
The guidelines, again, they both are not there in our state guidelines, which was there earlier. Azithromycin actually in the initial days, in the month of March, April last year was used. But some state continues to use this, but our state guidelines, we are not using both.
And the role of colchicine in COVID?
There are a lot of trials regarding colchicine, but again, we need evidence for that.
So Dr. Shobharani, she wants to know if second dose of vaccine is not taken as per the schedule, and if it is delayed, will it be effective?
I would like to know the duration. Delayed means what is the duration?
That is maybe after 28 to 48 days, they say, no, sir. So even after 40 days or 48 days, if they don't take a vaccine.
Now, in case of Covishield, the Lancet mentions that the more delay you do, delay say in the sense of 8 to 12 weeks, if there is the second dose between 8 to 12 weeks, it is more efficacy. The efficacy rate increases. That's what the article says. But Government of India has increased from 4 to from the second dose to 6 to 8 weeks.
6 to 8 weeks.
8 weeks.
After 8 weeks, if they don't take?
No, basically the vaccine is given to prevent the disease severity. So that's how they should know. The earlier they take, it is better within 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay.
Whereas with the Covaxin, it was initially 4 weeks now. They have increased to 6 weeks. 4 to 6 weeks is the second dose.
So, and do they need any isolation after vaccination? I don't know.
No.
And vaccination in plasma received patients?
They can be given vaccination, but what we usually suggest is to get a antibody testing, just to know what is the level of antibody test.
Okay. So Dr. Avinash wants to know the treatment guidelines for pregnant ladies or nursing women.
It is the same asymptomatic, while all goes by same. Because remdesivir again is a emergency drug. Undertaking should be taken when you give these drugs especially in moderate patient in pregnant. Because I don't think so anywhere they're using because of the risks involved.
Okay. So here is a request to upload the video. Definitely we will upload. You can check RUHS YouTube, Facebook and Twitter for all these updates. And post-COVID recovery, when the vaccine needs to be taken? Yesterday also they said after 14 days, I think, sir.
No. Post-COVID again, you need to wait. Check for the antibody. 6 to 8 weeks is again what is being suggested.
Okay.
Post-COVID, you should know whether because antibody start developing at a later date. So 8 weeks, ideally before you go for a vaccination, antibodies are suggested.
Okay. So here Misbah Sadaf, she wants to know a person taken 1 dose of vaccine and then developed RT-PCR positive, then how to go about the second dose?
I told you, no? Again, I'm repeating. It is 6 to 8 weeks. You need to wait for 6 to 8.
Okay. I think we have finished, sir. I request our Honorable VC, sir, to take over.
Yeah, I really thank
and please
Dr.
give your
Shashi
closing
Bhushan,
remarks and also other
Dr. Shashi
information you
Bhushan
would like
for
to give.
his wonderful lecture. He's been a very active part in the RGHS subject expert group and also in the technical advisory committee. He's been doing a stellar role, and he's been updating all the protocols as well. So I thank Dr. Shashi Bhushan on behalf of RGHS for this wonderful lecture. I'm sure all the audience benefited a lot. There were a lot of questions, a lot of doubts were cleared, and thank Shashi Bhushan once again. It is just to remind everybody that Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences in the forefront of, updating the treatment protocols, then also updating the other COVID management things. Very recently, we have issued, step down way of managing COVID patients, and also syndromic management of COVID. Likely to be COVID patients. All these guidelines have been issued from time to time. So it's only to see that the latest and the updated treatment guidelines are made available to every treating doctor so that the patients benefit. This is what RGHS has been doing, and also this training program, which I think we will be having very regularly. And next week also on Tuesday and Friday, we have lined up lecture programs. Thank you so much, Dr. Shashi Bhushan. And I also thank all the entire RGHS team for organizing this meet, and also Mr. Gautam from ECHO. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We
Thank
will
you.
see you again on Tuesday next week. Till then, take care, stay safe.
No, for the information, as per the Vice Chancellor, hello?
Yes, sir. Go ahead, sir.
The next program is on nursing care in COVID-19 management, second wave. That is on Tuesday, no? Dr. Rupashri?
Yes, sir. It's on 4th May.
4th May, no, that is, or 5th? 4th.
4th May, sir.
Yeah, 4th May. 4th May.
Tuesday.
Tuesday. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
See